Hey everybody, so I want to do a video on ego in religion, and I don't want people to misunderstand me and to think that there's no place for ego in religion. What I'm talking about is balance and people using ego in religion when probably they shouldn't be. Now, there's lots of different definitions for religion. One of the ones I like to use, definition by a guy named Paul Tillich, and he was a religious scholar, and his definition talked about how religion was about groups of people sharing an ultimate concern. I kind of like that idea of ultimate concern because it doesn't necessarily say deity, because not all religion is focused around deity, just something bigger than themselves. If you go to somebody like Socrates said, the less we need, the closer we come to the gods. And to a point, that's true. But I do think that there is a role for ego in religion. Of course, when you're forming your own ideas about religion, those are your ideas, and they come from your brain, your experiences, and so to a point, you have to have that role of ego in religion because it's your view. The simple fact that it's your view, something you possess, means that there is a little bit of ego involved. Of course, when you achieve goals within your religious path, like baptism, initiation, if you become a deacon, a priest, a bishop, so forth and so on, those types of things involve ego because it's personal achievement. When you are recognizing and following your will, your path that you think the divine has set forth for you, then that, of course, involves ego because it's looking into oneself, not just looking out to something larger than yourself. There's also the role of egolessness in religion, which would be recognizing yourself as part of a larger community, or as part of or an extension of deity. Lots of people do this when they find their patron god, patron saints, and things like that. The Christians have this thing where they call being possessed by the Holy Spirit. People involved in voodoo a lot of times will dance to excitement to allow deity to come into them. And this idea of being possessed by deity obviously means that they're letting go of ego to make that connection. So a lot of connecting with deity and connecting with that larger part of yourself means letting go of part of yourself to make that connection. So when I see people using too much of their own egoism in religion, it really starts to bother me. And there's a lot of this. And it's not just one faith or another, but I'm going to kind of pick on the Christians a little bit here too, because we see it so much in the Christian community, and perhaps that's because the Christian community is so large that we see so much of it from the Christian community, or perhaps it's because I'm not part of that community. But if you understand what I'm talking about, for example, the us or them ideology, there's a lot of this, it's perpetuated by Christianity. If you look into Matthew 10:16 says, "Behold, I send you out as sheep amongst the wolves," and it's talking about people who are righteous in nature being out behind all these unrighteous people. So it's like separating oneself from these other people, saying, I'm part of this group and you're not, therefore I'm good, I'm holy, I'm righteous, and you are not. Same with the sheep and the goats, which I think is Matthew 25:31. And it basically says that there's two groups of people, the sheep and the goats, and that when the Son of Man, otherwise, Jesus comes back, he's going to say, these people are worthy of my kingdom and these people are not. And so there's two groups of people. There's the worthy ones and there's the non-worthy ones. And so it's easy for Christians to kind of separate themselves from other people and say it's an us or them scenario. And it's really, you see so much of this in the Christian community that it's actually kind of like they make up things to perpetuate this. The NWO is a perfect example, right? This whole New World Order thing made of all these occultists that are evil and are taking over the world behind everything. They love to perpetuate this idea, but really there's no evidence to support it. They just, make claims about secret societies and people they don't know much about so that they can perpetuate this stuff. But it really, like I said, there's no real evidence behind it. Sister Sunshine made a video recently called Devil in the Dorm, where she talked about occultists, all occultists knowingly doing evil, and that they know they're doing these things and they're doing them to hurt you. This is what I'm talking about when I'm talking about us or them ideology. I'm talking about Yoka calling non-believers human garbage. This is egoism in religion. This is saying, I'm better than you are because I'm part of this group and you are not. That's unnecessary ego in religion. Another thing that I've seen is a lot of ego from religious authority. I should say that I don't think anybody is completely free of any of this. Sometimes I think we all fall into these little traps, these little ego traps, but I think some people kind of get possessed by these ego traps and it becomes who they are. And you can kind of see that, when I'm talking about YouTube people, you can see that from their videos where it's constantly they're judging other people and talking about other people in that way, and I'm going to bring up some more examples too. But when you talk about ego and religious authority, I have an actual real-life example. Last year I went to Samhain Festival here in North Carolina, and there was a high priestess who basically thought she was the best thing ever. I'm not going to name any names or anything like that, but this is a pretty prominent coven. And she used her position in order to order people around and kind of get attention for herself. The thing that I find odd about this is that these people are supposed to be ministers. And the word minister means to take care of, but so many times I see the flock taking care of the minister instead of the minister taking care of the flock. When I used to sell cars, and I once I saw a pastor who had a late model fancy car come in, and his flock had gotten together and raised money to purchase him a brand new 300C. Those aren't cheap cars. Those are pretty expensive cars. This was like a $35,000 automobile. And I'm thinking, what does this guy need for this? Shouldn't they be raising money to do things like help the homeless or to, for education materials and stuff like that instead of buying this guy a car? It just seems like, they're putting the focus on him instead of the focus on, connecting with deity and doing what they're supposed to do. It just doesn't seem like the right type of focus to me. And obviously you can disagree, but I just think it's one thing to help a guy out and get him a car, but it's another thing to get him a brand new freaking 300C. That's just another thing coming, Another example of ego would be this whole idea of fundamentalism in religion, where people say it's my way or the highway. You either do it exactly the way that I do it, or if you believe differently, or you pray differently, or you do ritual differently, or do anything differently than the way that I do it, then you're doing it wrong, and you're going down the wrong path, and, to hell with you. I see this a lot in Christianity, too. If you look at, for example, Shazulo, who focuses so much on other people who believe other things. He focuses on the Mormons and the pagans and anybody who practices differently than he does, and says, if you don't do it exactly the way that I do it, then you're doing it wrong. If you don't believe exactly the way that I do, then you're going to hell. I just, I see that as too much ego in religion, because he's saying, I've gotten everything exactly right, so you must do as I do. And that's taking the focus, again, off the deity and putting it onto himself. It's that whole idea of ego in religion. So I don't mean to pick on the Christians. Like I said, this happens in the pagan community, and I think it happens in all communities. But I do see a lot of it in that community, so I've used a lot of those examples. But there's also kind of a little bit of the flip side of the coin on that, and that's like egolessness in religion. For example, when people neglect themselves, their family, their friends, or other obligations for spiritual fulfillment, you ever see those people that they'll give money to their church, but they wouldn't help out their kids? They would, neglect their kids for church obligations. I've seen it before. I had a friend who, she came out as pagan, and her mom wasn't exactly happy about it. And she took them to a family counseling session at her church. And her church said that, the daughter had brought negativity in her house, and that she should, get rid of the negativity. So instead of sticking up for her daughter, the mom took the daughter and sent her out of the house. And I just think that's, you're neglecting your family and other obligations for spiritual fulfillment. And I think that you need to be pragmatic about this world. You're here for a reason. And one of those reasons, if you have kids, of course, is to take care of your kids. But you need to figure out what that reason is and fulfill that reason. So anyway, this is just a short little video talking about ego. If you have any other things to add, I would love to hear it. And blessed be.